At least it is in the room. We'll see online. People are quick to comment if it's not. Yeah, I figured give it just a second for people to see it and click it. Not everybody stares at Facebook like that does.
Where's that?
Baseball. Jansen's playing All Stars. So yeah, he says he's gonna watch him phone.
He's there watching him play, but he's home not. Multitasking.
Maybe the sun.
Oh.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Tonight for our monthly Mako meeting, we have a special guest with us, Mr. Walt Fulps, who some of you may know more as the Missouri Trout Hunter. He's got a presentation here to talk about thinking about trout and kind of adjusting your approach to how you fish for them and tactics along those lines. So without further ado, we'll let you go ahead and take it away. Thanks for being with us.
Okay, that's good to be here. Everybody hear me okay? Give me a wave if you can hear me. I don't see any waves. Guys in the room hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you good.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, like Jaron was saying, most people know me through the website Missouri Trout Hunter, which also became, it turned into a guide service and fly fishing lessons, then fly fishing classes at Westover Farms, and eventually turned into trips to Alaska every summer. So it kind of got out of control pretty quickly. But it's been a big part of my life. It's been a good time too. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time going over my old biography though. So if anybody has any questions regarding that kind of stuff, feel free to shout out at the end. Go ahead and move on to the next one there, Jern. What I was asked to talk about tonight is about the wild trout fishing that's available in Missouri. And most folks are aware that we do have blue ribbon trout waters, which some of them are the larger waters, which are managed more for trophy fish. You can keep one fish 18 inches or larger a day. But a lot of our blue ribbon rivers are actually these little creeks that have the wild trout populations in them. The one that's closest to most of the members of this group is going to be Crane Creek, which I fished quite a bit back when I was in college, which is going on 30 years ago. So I need to spend a little bit more time there, I think. So we're going to chat a little bit about the wild trout in Missouri and about how that's different from fishing for all the other trout that are available in Missouri. The good news is that it's not really all that different. And in a lot of ways, it's easier because wild trout act the way they're supposed to act, as opposed to a trout park trout, which acts kind of bizarre and crazy on a lot of days. Go ahead and hit that next one. Go ahead, Jern. So before we get too far ahead, one of the things that I'm kind of known for is arguing with people about things that they believe to be true about trout that are not true about trout. And the phrase cognitive dissonance, most folks are aware of what that means, or at least some sort of reference to it. Those of you who have trout fished most of your life, kind of like me, you grew up hearing things about these fish that aren't true. And you've probably managed to debunk a lot of the mythology. But the whole thing about cognitive dissonance is that when you're faced with two things that your brain wants to be true, but they can't both be true at the same time, then you kind of do some mental gymnastics to try to figure out a way to make it all fit together so that you don't have to admit to yourself that you made a mistake somewhere. Click that next one. So, for example, well, that's just what I just said, the two beliefs that contradict each other. So, for example, in the trout fishing world, at least when I was growing up, I had the belief that I was a good fisherman because I could go out and I could catch bluegill and catfish and that type of thing all day long. And then when I discovered trout and started trying to catch trout, I really struggled. So I didn't want to let go of the idea that I was a good fisherman. So what I did is I added another idea to try to make those two beliefs both factual, which in my case, it was believing that trout are smart, and that was a long time philosophy. That there are still people out there that believe that. People talk about the educated trout. So hit that next one. So the good news is that that's the first one that you can let go of. And those of us who are lifelong trout fishermen, we've let go of this one quite a while ago, but you'll still hear people talk about how trout are intelligent or trout are educated, or I just couldn't catch that one fish because he's been caught too many times and he's figured everything out. Hit that next one for me. So that's the good news. Trout, and normally we would have some audio on this, so you'll just have to imagine that there was some dramatic music right there, which I really miss that when I don't have that. But you got to deal with life sometimes. So the nice thing about trout is that they just do what they do. They react to their life. They're not much smarter than the bugs that they like to eat. And occasionally you'll find some that are just as dumb as a bag of doorknobs, which they're a lot of fun to catch because they're all they do is eat. Click that next one over there. And so this has become such a guiding focus of my trout fishing philosophy that it led to this book, which some of you are familiar with. Some of you have probably read that. If you have any interest in that, you can find it on, just Google Trout Are Stupid, and it'll come up with 14, 15 different places that are selling the books. You can take a look at that. That's my only plug for the night, so I'll let you off the hook after that. Go ahead. So proof that trout are stupid. Now this is, and actually, oddly enough, I'm wearing the exact same shirt in that picture that I'm wearing right now. Look at that. How odd is that? So this is actually a picture from Merrimack Springs Park, and that is what you call a pellet pig. That fish was hatched. That fish came from the hatchery the day before, and I just happened to see it sitting there, and I fished for that fish for about an hour, and I bounced flies off the fish's head. I bounced flies off the fish's face. I think I snagged her one time in the tail and she swam around. I finally did catch the fish legally. She finally did eat a fly. That fish is just, that's one of those fish that's as dumb as a bag of doorknobs, does not know how to live in the real world and is just reacting to their environment. But I drew quite a crowd of people looking at me catching that fish. And this was some stranger that took my phone away from me and wanted to take a picture of me catching that fish. So that's what's going on there. But pretty much every fish that you catch, there are some fish that are really, really tough to catch, and you have to do everything just right. When you catch them, you deserve to be proud. But by and large, most of the fish that you're going to catch, all they're doing is reacting to their environment, and everything they're doing makes complete and total sense. Next one. One more time. Okay, so a trout, when you think about the word brain, everybody pictures that gray, wrinkly thing that you got in your head, which is the mammal's brain. That gray, wrinkly part is the cerebral cortex. That's where we do all of our upper level thinking, and trout don't have that. Hit me one more time. So without that cerebral cortex, you're not going to see any what we call multi-stage clinical problem solving. So there's still problem solving. There's still decision making, there's still learning, but the multi-stage clinical problem solving is what mammals are good at. Of course, primates are good at it, we're good at it, dolphins are good at it, deer to a certain extent are even good at it. And basically, when we talk about that multi-stage clinical problem solving, we're talking about being faced with a problem and actually considering various options to try to solve that problem. And, so you might come up with a list of possible solutions, then you might look at that list and pick one that makes the most sense to you, or pick one that seems easiest, or pick one that seems most likely to, solve it the first time. Any animal that doesn't have that cerebral cortex, the way that they problem solve is more random. So they see an issue and they try to solve it by just looking around and seeing what pops into their head. It's more of a trial and error sort of thing. Now, when they stumble upon that solution, if it works for them, they're going to repeat that solution until it stops working. Hit me one more time. And again. So, but the interesting thing, though, is that these animals without a cerebral cortex, they can learn. They can remember what works and they can remember what didn't work. And the better they are at that, the more likely they are to survive. They can also take a decision that they made that worked in one situation, and they can remember and apply it to a different situation that's kind of similar, which is really interesting. And there was a study of sticklebacks. It was a biology class in England, I believe. And one of the things that they did in this class is they would take sticklebacks, which are just a little fish, little 3 or 4 inch fish, in an aquarium, and they would test the fish to see how long it took them to figure out which metal rod hanging down in the water would provide them with food pellets. And this one particular class, though, they got results that were out of the ordinary. Hang on a second, I got some glitch here. There we go. So they had results that were out of the ordinary. The fish seemed to be learning way too fast as opposed to some of the other classes. And so they focused on that to try to figure out what was going on. And the only difference that they could identify was that the 2 aquariums where they had the fish that was being studied and the fish that were waiting to be studied were too close to each other. So the fish on deck could observe the fish that was being studied, and they were learning by watching, which that was the first time that they'd ever discovered that fish had that ability. And that's not that terribly long ago. So once that happened, that became people became aware of that out in the public arena. It became something that people started paying attention to, and it explains a lot to how a trout knows to eat this or knows to eat that or knows to head into the root wad when this happens or knows how to head downstream instead of upstream when there's a predator present, because they're watching the other fish and seeing what the other fish are doing that's successful. Next slide. So we're going to kind of go through some of this mythology now. I know you guys are experienced trout fishermen, so a lot of this stuff you already know. Some of this stuff you may disagree with, though. And this applies to all trout, not just wild trout, not just stocked trout that have been in the river for a long time, not just trout park trout, but all trout. So the oldest myth is that trout are smart and that wild trout are especially smart. Next one. This one's pretty common. Trout are picky eaters. Now, there are times when trout are selectively feeding, but most of the stuff that when you go to a fly shop and you pick up that fly that's just a beautiful piece of art, and you're going to pay that $3 or $4 for that fly, most of the stuff on that fly is designed to catch the fisherman, not the fish. I've caught more fish on streamer fishing. I've caught more fish on a black woolly booger than any other streamer pattern I've ever bought or tied. We've all had streamers that have googly eyes on them or gills or different things like that. Woolly booger has always been the number one. So, apparently those googly eyes were meant to get me to buy the fly, not really to get that fish to bite. Next one, trout like colder water. So this one still gets some arguments. Trout are cold-blooded, which means they don't care what the temperature of the water is. But the colder the water, the better the oxygen content. So when you're in an environment where the water is colder, the oxygen goes up, they can breathe better. So if they chose to chase your fly all over the river, they've got the ability to because they can breathe. But the colder the water, the colder the fish, their metabolism goes down, their muscle twitch goes down, their reaction time goes down. They're not as hungry. So we're really looking for that water temperature and oxygen content that's kind of in that sweet spot. In Missouri, upper 50s, lower 60s, tends to be kind of the sweet spot that we're looking for. And then, of course, if it's a deep hole, the water changes according to depth. If the water is moving slow or fast over, rocky bottom, causing some riffles, you're going to see some temperature variations. But as far as the preference is concerned, what you're seeing is a fish in the colder water. You're seeing a fish that just feels better about life and is hungry and has the oxygen to actually feed actively. But down further downstream in that warmer water, there's fish down there too. They're just acting differently. This one, trout swimming upstream looking for the spring. Trout are not smart enough to know what a spring is or where the spring is. When the water conditions are right, they like to swim upstream. When the water conditions are not so great, they tend to drift downstream. That's the whole point behind the whole migration. They don't, and we're going to cover that too here in just a second. They don't migrate purposefully searching for anything in particular. It's just, for example, in the spring, the water warms up enough that they're more active and they're hungrier. They get some rain, the oxygen level's good, and they just start moving upstream. And then as they're moving upstream, they tend to get crowded, so they start getting competitive with each other. Okay, next one. Uh, I've heard this one actually from a lot of sources about the trout not being hungry when the water's too warm, and the argument that I heard that still kind of makes me chuckle is when it's 100 degrees outside, you don't want to go sit outside and eat a pizza. You would rather go outside and maybe have some watermelon or something like that. You want to eat light because it's too hot to eat heavy. But since trout are cold-blooded, the reverse is true for them. So the warmer the water, the higher their metabolism. But since the oxygen content is inversely related, the warmer the water, the lower the oxygen. So they may be starving to death, but they just don't have the breath to be able to chase down that big streamer that you're throwing at them. The best they can do is try to catch some bugs that are drifting by. And I still get arguments over this one. About trout having amazing eyesight, specifically when people say, oh, you got to use fluorocarbon, especially if the water's really clear, or you have to use 7X, if you're doing this or you're doing that, or your flies have to be exactly dead on perfect, the right color, right size. Truth is, we can prove that trout don't have very good eyesight because it was relatively easy for the fisheries biology smarty pants guys to dissect the eyeball and take a look at the rods and cones, so they can actually do the math and give us an idea of what trout are seeing. They do see movement pretty well. They have the ability to focus. They don't really have the ability to focus very well at all, but the ability to focus that they have underwater is interesting because they can focus on two different planes at the same time, whereas we can't. You're focusing on one thing that's close to you. Everything behind that object is fuzzy. With trout, their lens is flatter, so they don't have that much of an issue. But by and large, when people say things like, "Well, you have to use that 7X line," or "You have to use fluorocarbon," in most cases, the line doesn't really affect the fish all that much. Now, what they do see is like I was saying, they see movement well, so they'll see a shadow. So if your line is entering the water above a trout's head and you're kind of jigging it around, the point where that line hits the water will actually cast a shadow all the way down to the creek bed, and they'll see the shadow. So when you hear people talking about you got to have 2-pound test line when you're jig fishing or something like that, well, that's actually more true because they're jigging that line around above the trout's head. But if they were fishing a rooster tail, then it's not that big of a deal because the line is underwater and they just don't have the ability to differentiate. And then you have to revisit the idea that they're not all that smart. So even if they could see the line, they're not smart enough to say, oh my goodness, that's fishing line. That's not a real food. That's not a real piece of food. Okay, trophy size trout being extra smart. That kind of falls under the category of wild trout being extra smart. Trophy size trout in Missouri, they either became a trophy in the hatchery and got stocked yesterday, or if they were stocked at a normal size or born in a normal size and grew real big, what you're looking at the biggest chicken in the whole river. Every little thing that moves suddenly or makes a sudden sound, that trout learned early on to head for cover. And when you're talking about how trout can be difficult to catch, in the trout parks, they have a different style of behavior to try to survive than you'll find in a wilder stream, whether it's a blue ribbon stream where they stock, a red ribbon stream where they stock, or in the wild trout streams. If they're dealing with real life predators, which they all are now because we have otters, we have heron. We have a few bears around, but I don't think the bears are all that big of a risk to our trout right now. The smart trout, in air quotes, the smart trout are the ones that any sudden movement, any sudden sound, they listen to their fight or flight response and they take off out of there. So I used to fish Crane Creek quite a bit when I was in college, and when I first started, I was very dubious about its reputation because I went several times down there. I never once saw a fish, and I was used to going fishing places where I could see the fish. Truth of the matter is, though, is that what I was doing is I was walking in the creek and making all kinds of noise in that creek, and those fish were just taking off out of there before I was getting anywhere close. It wasn't until I started staying on the bank and keeping my head down and watching where my shadow was that I started catching fish, and it still took a long time for me to actually see a trout without actually catching the trout, if that makes sense. Okay. And we talked about this a little bit, trout migrating, looking for the spawning grounds. The thing about spawning is that it tends to take place when the conditions are right, and those conditions, the way that they respond to those conditions are with the migration. So most animals that are on an annual reproduction cycle, we really don't know why they're on a specific cycle. We don't know what triggers it other than just their internal clock. But salmon, for example, will migrate in the summer, up in the Pacific Northwest. And of course, there's the whole magical thinking about how they find their way back to the exact spot where they were born, which is also not true. But I don't want to go into that into that in too much depth. But essentially, what they do is they work the ocean currents for however many years it takes for them to reach spawning age, and then as they're heading past the territory where they were born, they recognize some smells. That's one thing that is true, is that trout and salmon, they have a very acute sense of smell. So that's the most logical working theory, is that they kind of follow their nose back into areas that are familiar. But they end up in the wrong rivers all the time. There are plenty of rivers up there that don't have a king salmon run, for example. They only have other species of salmon, but then somebody will catch some accidental king salmon that happen to wander up the wrong river. So that sort of thing happens all the time. So it's not a mystical, magical sort of thing. With Missouri trout, most of the migration happens in the spring and in the fall. And essentially what you're seeing is the water temperatures changing into an area where they feel more, their muscle activity is better, the metabolism is better. You see some rain, so the river swells, and when the current increases, their natural instinct is to swim against it. So you'll see fall migration, you'll see spring migration. You'll also see some of that migration is due to the males harassing the females. So when you have, because one of the arguments that I get is, well, what about on the tailwaters? We don't have like spring and fall floods. We have floods every day. But there's still that annual clock that happens, and so the females are ready for spawning, and they'll start moving in response to that, and the males will harass them. They'll kind of nip at them and chase them around and do that sort of thing. So that all kind of gets fish moving up as well. But for example, the brown trout spawns on Lake Taneycomo, the migrations on Lake Taneycomo, they're not nearly as pronounced as you might expect them to be if that was a free-flowing type of river. Okay, hit one more. So the good news is that, like I was saying before, wild trout are actually easy to catch. They do exactly what you expect them to do, or what you should expect them to do. They respond to their natural environment, their natural stimuli in a very predictable way. So when you're going out to, let's say, I'm going to say Crane Creek, because that's probably the most, for most people that are watching this, it's probably the most local wild stream for you. When you're going out to Crane Creek, if you really have no idea what's going on out there at that time, then I would encourage you to use the same process that I use when I'm problem solving any stream, whether it's a wild stream, whether it's a stocked stream, whether it's a little creek, a big river, it doesn't matter. Because trout feed in one of four different ways. They feed aggressively, opportunistically, passively, and selectively. And it's your job to figure out what they're doing, and it'll narrow down the fly that you're going to pull out of your box and the technique that you're going to use to present that fly. So you're going to test their behavior. And so the way that you're going to test first is you're going to start with aggressively feeding fish, because they're the easiest fish to catch. Go ahead and hit the next button there. They're the easiest fish to catch. One more time. because they're feeding aggressive. Anything that swims across their field of vision, they want to attack it. Now, there are certain creeks where this is kind of hard to do with a streamer. Crane Creek has good enough water that you can streamer fish Crane Creeks successfully. But if you're going to go hit Barren Fork, for example, it'd be really tough to fish a streamer at Barren Fork. But really, what you're doing is you're not offering them something specific. You're using a presentation to see how aggressive the fish are feeding. So that testing for an aggressively feeding fish might be something as simple as swinging a fly across the current and seeing if you get any hits. If that does not work, then you'll move on to opportunistic feeding fish. You're going to check and see, are they willing to just taste stuff that looks like it might be interesting? If you've ever had the opportunity to sit on a high bank and just watch trout behavior, one of the things that you'll notice is that they'll eat pieces of leaves and sticks and things, and they'll usually spit them back out. But when things are drifting by, they'll just kind of taste stuff. They'll just experiment. We like those fish too, because those fish are easy to catch. Click that one for me. So this is excuse me. Everybody's hopefully familiar with this fly. If you're not, then I can't believe you're from Missouri, because this is one of those flies I think we all grew up on, the old glow bug, which is basically a bigger, fluffier version of the egg flies that they like to use, in the salmon spawning territories and whatnot. A fish that's feeding opportunistically, they may never have eaten a fish egg before, but it's big, it's fluffy, it's colorful, looks like it might taste good. I'm going to give it a try. And that's the reason why we're catching fish nowadays on mop flies, which I will admit I have used mop flies, and I'll try not to be too embarrassed about that, but I would rather catch 100 fish on a mop fly than cast dry flies all day and catch nothing. So when you find fish that are feeding opportunistically, pick a fly that's visible and put it where the fish can see it, and bury your pride and just enjoy the day. But if they're not feeding opportunistically, then the next thing that we're going to check is we're going to check to see if they're passively feeding, which for trout is going to be most of the time. For a trout, especially a decent sized trout, to maintain their own body weight, they pretty much have to be eating all the time. So if they're in an environment where feeding aggressively is not possible because maybe the oxygen content isn't what it should be, then they're going to be forced to graze. So they're going to find themselves a nice feeding lie where there's two currents side by side, where they can be in the slower current and drift into the faster current to pick up things that are drifting by, or maybe hugging the bottom where there's a faster current above their head where they can come up and grab a fly as it's drifting by. But by and large, what they're going to be feeding on is stuff that they've seen before, or something that's similar to something they've seen before. So they're not going to be all that daring when they're passively feeding. So this is when you're going to be getting into that portion of your box with the more traditional sort of flies. Go ahead and click that. So the old pheasant tail, but basically anything that looks like a mayfly, caddisfly, midge, stonefly. That's with the passively feeding fish, you're getting into that fly selection. Now, when you look at my fly box is actually organized like this. So the bottom rows of my fly box are going to be streamers, and then I'm going to move into the opportunistic flies, the glow bugs, the Y2K bugs, the mop flies, that sort of thing. And when I get into searching for the passively feeding fish or testing those passively feeding fish, I'm going to start off with the bigger, goofier nymphs, like a big rubber-legged stonefly or a Pat's rubber leg, something like that. And I'm going to gradually get smaller and smaller and more natural looking. I'm trying to find that sweet spot where I'm going to have a fly that's as visible as possible, but it's also normal enough looking that a fish that's not feeling all that adventurous right now, that they're going to be more likely to eat it. I'm not going to go straight to that size 22 zebra midge. All right, next one. So the thing about selectively feeding fish, especially in the Ozarks, they will make you bang your head against a wall. A lot of places around the country, they have major primary hatches that happen during certain times of the year. So if you go out west and you hit it just right, there may be a time when you're there for the big green drake hatch, or you go up north, the big hex hatch, where there's a million bugs in the air and they're all the same bug. And so you can nymph it, you can You can fish emergers, you can fish dries and spinners, all the same species, and you can have a great time. But in Missouri, we don't usually see that all that often. Sometimes we'll see like a big caddis hatch. When I was guiding on the Merrimack, it didn't even happen every year, but from time to time we would have just a ridiculous caddis hatch in February for some crazy reason, and the fish would get keyed in on those caddis. But most of the time, when we had a lot of bugs in the air, you'll see multiple species of bugs all kind of hatching at different times. So when a fish is feeding selectively, and you see one fish hitting dries over to your right and another fish tailing over to your left, they may both be feeding selectively, but they may be feeding on completely different bugs. And before anybody starts thinking, yeah, but you said that they're not picky. When a fish is feeding selectively, really what they're doing is they identify something that they know is food, and it's squishy and it tastes good, and everything else kind of becomes just kind of part of the background static. So it's not that they're looking at your fly and making this decision that, no, that fly is not big enough or that fly is too small or whatever. They're just kind of in this zone, and there's a bunch of bugs floating past them that all look the same. And once they've identified that it's edible, they're just going to pick at them. And during the course of the hatch, they may start off hitting the nymphs as the nymphs begin to swim and begin to get active and begin to move to the surface, and they'll follow it all the way through the entire process where they're finally feeding on those dries. But the frustrating thing is that if you can't figure out what bug they're feeding on, and in Missouri it's really tough to do that sometimes, you might as well just go grab a sandwich or something and come back later on in the afternoon and try again, because it can be just absolutely maddening. So if you go through that whole process and you're still not catching fish, and I'm going to put us back on Crane Creek. If I go through that whole process and I'm not catching fish, there's a few things that might be happening. And they'll just come up here. Go ahead. So they may not be feeding at all. Now, that can happen for a lot of different reasons. If it's like a bright, sunshiny day and the water is low and there's a lot of leaves, drifting around, and there's a lot of shadows moving and that sort of thing, you may find a time when the trout are just so freaked out from all of the shadow movement that they're just like up underneath shelter and they're just hunkering down and they're just not going to feed. If you're fishing a river where they have a lot of floaters, canoers, kayakers, they may be freaked out from all the weekend activity, and Monday may not fish very well because they're still recovering from it. So it could be that you just kind of timed it poorly. On a creek like Crane Creek, or really any of our trout streams where the fish have the opportunity to live in a more wild setting, they learn how to be spooky, because not only they're not concerned about us. There's not enough fishermen to really worry them, but they are concerned about real predators, real dangers. And so they've trained themselves. They don't really, it's not an intellectual thing, of course, but they have trained themselves to have an instant reaction to any sudden movements or any sudden sounds. So a tree branch hits the water, of course, they scatter. But if a shadow flows across their face when they're in the river, they scatter. If you're walking in the creek and you kick over a rock, they're going to scatter. So especially on these little wild streams where these fish were born and raised, and are running from otters and just trying to survive day by day, when you go through all four of these steps and you're still not catching fish, it's time to kind of look at yourself and how you're presenting, not just yourself, but also how you're presenting that fly. Are you casting across fish? Are you making noise with the line on the water? Is there anything at all that you could be doing differently that's going to put the fly in front of the fish before the fish feels nervous about anything? Go ahead, one more. The other thing is, especially when we're fishing with a smaller fly or something that's not as obvious, people don't recognize that even when you look at one of our creeks and it looks gin clear, people don't recognize that there's still a lot of debris going on underneath there, and the visibility is just not very good down there. So especially when I'm fishing a wild stream, when I'm fishing a little creek, Crane Creek, Mill Creek, Spring Creek, any of those little creeks like that, a favorite technique for a lot of folks is swinging something like a soft hackle or a small midge. And what's odd about that is that that's not really what those bugs will do naturally, but it does work. And there's a couple of reasons why it works. One reason that it works is because something like a soft hackle, you may not have ever thought about this, but if you dip a soft hackle in the water next time you're using one and take a look at it, its profile is actually going to look like a nymph. And then when you work it across in the current, it's going to open and close and open and close and open and close. So it looks like a nymph, but it looks alive. So that's one reason why swinging a soft hackle works really well, especially on a little creek like that. But just the angle of your presentation is going to benefit you, because if you're trying to do like a traditional nymphing presentation, you're walking upstream, you're casting upstream, and you're dropping your fly with an indicator, and then you're drifting it back over the fish. A spooky trout that's worried about otters and herons and things of that nature, or even like an osprey or something, that kind of stuff is going to kill your fishing day. But when you're swinging a fly, you're casting downstream to them, so you're dropping that fly pretty far upstream of them. So you're not lining them, you're not throwing a shadow on them, and then you're drifting it down to them, letting that line straighten out, then you're drifting it across. So now you're presenting this fly to them before they have the opportunity to get nervous about the shadows and the sounds and all that kind of stuff. Last slide. Let's see if this works. Hey, success. All right. So this is some footage that I took on the Merrimack River, and you can't tell by this image, but on this day, this river was gin clear. But if you take a look at it, you're going to see little bits of debris drifting by all the time. And I'm kind of moving the camera back and forth here, kind of like how a trout would be scanning, looking for food. But then also because of the light diffusion, it turns blue just 10 feet or so in front of the fish. So even though we can look down into the water and it looks gin clear, this is what the trout is dealing with. So one way that you can help that trout find your fly, especially if you're using something small that's kind of hard for them to pick out of all of this clutter, is when you cast to swing that fly. You cast across the current, sink that fly down, straighten your line out, and then when it drifts across the current, lead it across the current with your rod tip. It's going to go from bottom on one side, across this field of vision, then up on the other side. So kind of like an upward diagonal movement. And one thing for sure is that when the trout sees that movement, he knows it's not debris. Now, it's not natural movement. It's not something that a bug naturally does, swimming diagonally across their field of vision like that, although I'm sure it happens. But it's something that's going to get their attention and draw them away from all the clutter that's going on. And using that with a casting downstream sort of presentation, especially in little water and clear water where the fish are more worried about otters than they are about people. If you've had success doing that, now you know why it works. It works very, very well. Next one. So that's all I've got for you guys. I'd be happy to take any questions that you've got, and try not to argue with me too much about if I said anything that you don't like. But yeah, anybody got anything for me? I'm ready for it.
Anybody got any questions? They're all giving blank stares. That must be good. Nobody wants to argue with you.
I've heard all the arguments before.
All right. Well, if nobody has anything, I guess we're good. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. That was very informative. I think we all probably learned something, some new tactic to take with us to the river. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you bet. You guys, you can find me on Facebook, Missouri Trout Hunter Facebook page, or friend me, Walt Fulps. You can friend me on Facebook. That's fine too. Or shoot me an email, Walt at Missouri Trout Hunter. Happy to answer any questions that you've got. Advice is free.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
All right. Y'all have a great night.